Welcome back to the Rushfield Lunch. Here, presented by the Ankler, where every week I talk to the great thinkers, doers, gallivanters of our time. And I'm so glad to have with us today our good friend Lena Dunham. No, just kidding. Uh, this is not Lena Dunham. We had scheduled her, but she had a conflict. She will be joining us next week. Um, and it said so. Next week's guest kindly agreed to come a week early, even though his wonderful new book, uh, The Golden Hour, does not come out until next week. So you should pre-order. Do you have a? I just have. I would
There it
hold up a
is.
copy. Yeah, I
There it
just have it
is.
on Kindle. So
Yep, it's out on Tuesday. So yeah,
uh,
orderable now. It'll show up on your doorstep imminently. If you're in LA, you can come check me out at Diesel next Tuesday too. That's the actual pub date.
oh, fantastic! And it's a great book. We're going to be talking a lot about that and a lot about the history of the book and your other works. As well there. So actually, why don't we start out just tell it the most important thing that always gets left behind in these talks. Tell us about your book. What?
Um, yeah. Okay. Well, Richard, you know all this. I'm just going to mention too that Richard and I go way back. We went to high school together.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll insert here. I was going to get to this, but I made the mistake last night of doing the math of exactly how long we go back.
Oh Jesus.
Do you want to hear? It's not good.
It's not good. It's 43 years,
40,
something like that.
45, 45 years. Yeah.
45. Yeah, Jesus.
No,
Uh,
43, 43,
yeah,
43. You're right. It was 1982.
yeah.
Uh, it's a
Well,
big.
fortunately, I'm the son of the oldest still working man in Hollywood, I believe.
So
Um,
so you've got another 100 years of our friendship to go. I
I
don't
hope
know.
so. Yeah.
I
You'd be
don't
so
know that
lucky.
I'll be with you the whole way through that, but our first 43 has been great. And
That they have.
and we'll get into all that. So yeah, go on. I
So,
interrupted. You're telling about your wonderful book. So
okay. So anyway, the Golden Hour is it is a memoir of a kind, although it has some very unmemoir like characteristics. And it's a story about my family's voyage through Hollywood and my own voyage through Hollywood over the last 70 years. The nonagenarian I just mentioned, who will be 92 next Thursday, is Fred Specktor of Creative Artists Agency. He went to work for MCA in the 50s. He was Lou Wasserman's assistant. Um, and then became an agent himself and was sort of part of the transformation of Hollywood in the late 60s and early 70s. Represented a lot of sort of key new Hollywood figures like Bruce Dern and Beau Bridges, and had a hand in movies like The Landlord and King of Marvin Gardens. My mom was a screenwriter with a kind of curiously aborted career, and which I think might be common among screenwriters.
yeah.
And then I myself,
They
I'm a
say they say
novelist.
that they say that all political careers end in failure. I,
Yes.
I think all screenwriting careers sort of begin and middle and end in failure.
They definitely have more to, they will inevitably contend more with failure than with success.
Yeah,
I feel like I've known some very successful and award-winning writers for whom it's just kind of the nature of the beast.
yeah.
Um, but I'm a novelist, but I was a development executive and then a studio executive through the 1990s, and since then I've been also a screenwriter. So on the one hand, the book is sort of has a personal narrative that's about sort of the story of my family's passage through the changing industry, but it also has a sort of wider sort of historical narrative that weaves through it. I was really much more interested in a lot of ways in writing a book that was about um, kind of hate the term the death of the movies, because it's just one of those kind of points that gets boringly deliberated. And obviously there are still movies, and obviously there are still great movies, but the movies as a sort of defining feature of of kind of everyday life and of American culture. I don't think that exists anymore.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I wrote to support your thesis. I wrote many times that I think 2024 will go down as the worst year of studio filmmaking ever. There were a few, very few good films, maybe one or two great films, but for studio filmmaking, as it were, like it was really a nadir. Uh, that,
yeah,
that
one hates to be one hates to be that guy, that sort of pessimistic guy who, oh, it's over, because I think as long as there are still, gifted filmmakers making movies, it's not. But in a kind of cultural sense, I think it is. I think it's not central anymore. And I wanted to write not just sort of, I don't think the book is sort of just sort of a dire rehashing of that fact. I wanted to kind of examine that and think about what it means in terms of kind of American life and American culture. I mean, in many ways, this book has a lot of people in it that you don't necessarily associate with the movies at all, right? You don't think of Huey Newton as a
yeah,
Hollywood figure. You don't think of James Baldwin as a Hollywood figure. But the movies really were. I think they touched everybody in ways that are unexpected. Um,
yeah, and that's a tragedy. We'll get back to this, but that when we were talking about movies when we were young, these were big movies that everybody saw. There was something the art house world was there, and that was part of it, and produced some great films, and continues in the art house world, or the independent cinema too. But it was, mainstream cinema was a serious a serious calling and a serious thing, and I think that your book, it it's really interesting how your family story and your story kind of echo the triumph and tragedy of what became of that whole industry. So let's start at the beginning.
yeah,
Let's talk a little about your father's journey there. He kind of is one of the last direct connections to, like, almost a dawn of Hollywood. That he was an assistant to Lew Wasserman, and who goes back to prehistory as far as we're
that he
concerned.
does. Yeah, and then even at the William Morris office, he was. I remember Abe Lastfogel, right? It's like Abe
It,
Lastfogel was doing it in like the 1910s or something,
yeah,
right?
with the founding agent of Hollywood, essentially.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh, so what did he take away from that? What did he learn? How did that shape him, coming up from this world?
It's interesting. My dad is um he's an enigmatic guy in a lot of ways. Even now, having written an entire book about him and having kind of shaken all the research out of him and out of all the stories out of him and out of everybody I can find, there's that quality that agents used to have. And I think they probably have it now in a different way. There's the famous thing that Lou Wasserman said: "Stay out of the spotlight; it fades your suit." Uh, and I think that my dad in many ways exemplified that. He doesn't love talking about himself, and he talks about his clients endlessly, but less about himself. And
How does he like reading a book about himself?
he more
Right.
than you would imagine. I think he likes the book a lot, which is fortunate, I guess.
Yeah,
But because you never know. But I think you were asking what he learned or what he took away from it. I think obviously the business is, he will cop to the fact that the business is nothing like what it was. Never mind 70 years ago. The business really isn't anything like it was 20 years ago.
yeah.
Um,
But
you know,
when he joined when he joined MCA,
yeah,
I mean, now it's a business of Ivy League people coming through MBA programs,
yes, yes,
and all this, and it was a very, I mean, he came in as a gopher, essentially,
yeah, as a
with a
gopher, and that was, and I think at that time, there was this great tension in the 50s and even later than that. I think even like in the 70s and 80s, 60s between these these people like my dad who like maybe had a bachelor's degree, but a lot of the time didn't. My dad is sort of slippery about whether he actually did graduate from UCLA or if maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't quite go all the way through that experience. There's the famous story about David Geffen, right, steaming open the mail in the mailroom so that he could conceal the fact that he didn't actually have a college degree. But at the same time, I think guys like Lou Wasserman or Jules Stein, the founders of MCA, they did have, they I think they wanted to present as gentlemen, right?
Yeah.
They had a real sense of sort of like, well, education was important even if they didn't have it. Um, and
Yeah,
and yeah,
it was that mix of like very, very working class, sort of, populist roots, but very high aspirations also.
yeah,
Very,
yeah, and also I think a kind of a respect for art and artists. I mean, obviously, that's not to say that they were driven by those concerns in any way,
yeah.
or but there was still, I think, some sense of I mean, when I remember this from later. I remember this from the '80s. When Ovitz would sign a Scorsese or something like that, that meant something to him.
Well,
Yeah,
that's from the beginning there.
yeah,
That's what I mean. These were businessmen, and they were very
yeah.
brutal businessmen often, and they certainly, they they weren't socialists looking to
No,
just spread the money around and everything. But in terms of what they took pride in and what they really what made them beam, it was make being involved in putting together that movie that wins the best picture and the and much more than I created this big company
right, right.
that now has a
That
market
there
cap
was
of
there was an economy of prestige that
right.
had something to do with it. However sort of peripheral, it was an active force, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's the thing that Mike Ovitz writes in his autobiography where he says, what, as agents we didn't create anything, and I was frustrated. That's his whole kind of the story he tells about why he finally wanted to leave the agency. And I just think it's interesting to sort of contrast that with the people we have today who don't give a fuck about that at all.
Yeah, it's and
Right,
I mean you think even in the agency business, it's I mean it back then it was about creating great stars, great
right,
artists who did meaningful things and now it's about like okay, you did a couple movies, so how do we cash this in and get you out of this so you're not just stuck making movies and you can have a suntan lotion line or something that you can sell.
right,
The 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 accomplishment they're proud of is creating this huge brand and constellation of businesses around a an artist, not what the artist performs in necessarily.
right, right.
And
Seems
it,
bad.
you know, so the stories you tell about working with Wasserman there, I mean, they are really brutal in a way that I think I would just like turn to dust if I had to go that. Let alone
I,
the
I think the history of being screamed at, the history of screamers in the picture business is, pretty well documented at this point. And hopefully, I mean, I haven't worked in for a studio or in development or in more than 20 years. So but hopefully it no longer really that culture no longer exists. I can't imagine that it does. Uh,
I don't think in the same way, but it was coupled with you talk about there was a moment when your father was still just delivering the mail,
yeah,
and he bumps into Wasserman and he could just feel that Wasserman knew everything about him. Just like
Right.
from this glance, just told him like he knew who he was, he knew what he was doing here, he knew what time he'd gotten out of bed that morning,
Yeah.
and all that. And that's kind of what with the brutality we've lost that kind of like just people that are just
Yeah.
so good at what they do like that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't, it's hard to imagine the David Zaslavs of the world knowing or giving a shit
I
about
mean,
people that far down the pyramid from them.
yeah, and giving that sense that like to everyone that works here, like I know all about you, I know what you're doing here, I know.
But it did
No,
scale very differently. I mean, the business scaled very differently, and I would say again, in our lifetimes, it scaled differently. In the sense that I mean, I worked at CAA myself as a mail boy in the 80s, and momentarily following in my dad's footsteps. And it was, I mean, I was still in high school, but it was a mom and pop company, which sounds insane, right? When you're talking about
yeah,
creative artist agency, like the idea that I knew everybody who worked there, like, and I could still probably from memory like recite the entire list of employees that were there when
yeah.
I was there. Yeah.
I mean, it's that building that I think that hadn't even been built yet.
No,
The
no, no.
I'm
The
but
IMP building. Yeah.
but even that, I mean, when that was built, and that
Right.
was right about 1990, was
Yeah.
it?
90. Yeah. 91, I think. Yeah.
And that at the time seemed like just they had built this fortress that was just this impregnable, like magnificent, the grandest power structure you ever seen.
Yeah.
And and now you drive past it and it's like, oh, okay, it's a little
It was
three
until
story.
a few years ago. It was a WeWork. I can't
Yeah,
remember what it is now. It's become something else. But that's actually a weird. I mean, you think about that. You go back to the '50s and you think, MCA, who were the kind of big imperial structure, and they had this building that had been designed by Paul Revere Williams, and it was meant to look all Greek revival and classical and beautiful. And you walk by it on the street now, and you're like, dinky little that dinky little
yeah.
thing, right? You
It
know,
is yeah, that and but you look at where CAA is now, and it's a much larger building, but
yeah,
it's entirely unimpressive as a building.
yes,
It
yes.
has no care. It's just another glass and steel skyscraper, of which there are 20 others within 5 blocks, and they all look exactly the same. It has no personality or no statement to the world or anything.
No personality and no statement to the world seems to be, again, one could say that's the problem with, in a weird way, the industry itself at this point.
Yeah, yeah, precisely. So, what for your father? And
Yeah.
I want to get into the important part of the story, which is our meeting at Crossroads.
Yes,
Right when
absolutely. It changed the
when you
world
got
then. Yeah.
that great that fatal day. But what for your father through much of this golden age of Hollywood? Uh, Becoming an agent and working with all these people. What how did that shape his personality? How did that affect who he became, and what of that was passed on to you? Do you think?
It's interesting. I think my dad didn't, he had working actors as clients, but his career took off pretty late. Meaning, when I was a kid, he represented, people like, I don't know, again, Bruce Dern, Bo Bridges, people who weren't quite stars. Like, I mean, Bruce Stern would top
Yeah.
line a movie, but not the same as representing Jack Nicholson, who my dad had represented in the early '60s,
Hmm.
but couldn't find him a job. He was,
He went through a long period
yeah,
when he just
yeah, he struggled for a long time, so he didn't, and then when CAA kind of took off, he started. That's when in the mid to late '80s, suddenly it's like there were people like Danny DeVito who he had signed very early, but Danny wasn't a star, and Danny, of course, it probably became one. But that's when he picked up Gene Hackman, Bob De Niro, Bob Duvall, Barbara Streisand, um, uh, you know, and his
uh,
career kind of
yeah.
erupted from there. And I think, he was a pretty driven guy, and I mean, I think still has to be if he's 92 years old and still goes to the office every day and
That's
actually produces. But I think so in a lot of ways, I think like he had this kind of hard charging, but not, but he was known, I think, for being a little bit of a hothead, which he definitely is not anymore. But there was a famous story about him, ripping up someone's Rolodex card and mailing it back to them, or you know, his assistants and his ex-wives will speak to the fact that he was not an easy man to live with in the particularly in the 80s and 90s. Um, but I think, but he's a gentleman, right? We were talking about Ron Meyer, and it's the same thing. If you call my father, he will return your call.
It's
And
incredible that generation. I know of a screenwriter who came to L.A.
yeah,
Some renowned, and he came to L.A. He didn't have any particular connections or anything. He was from the Midwest, and no one would return his call. He was trying to get an agent. He tried to get a meeting with anybody. He tried to get a class, and he couldn't get anyone on the phone. So he decided, okay, I'm going to stop calling the assistants, and I'm
yeah,
going to call the head of the studio. And he would start calling people like Peter Goober and the people, and they all just they returned all their calls.
yeah,
So this guy had called them. They called him back. He said, "What do you want?" He's like, "Oh, I just got in town. I have the script. I have some ideas what I'm talking about." He's like, and they said, "Oh, great. Okay, call the head of development and tell him to schedule a meeting with you for next week." And then he would call the head of development, who he never would have gotten to talk to, and say, "Peter Gruber said we should have a meeting."
right.
Uh, but
Yeah.
that was that generation. They
Yeah, yeah, but in terms of you ask what I would have inherited from him in terms of temperament or whatever. I mean, obviously, writers and agents very very different personality types in a certain way. I probably don't have the sort of hard headedness about business that I should, although I'm getting better. Uh, but I think there is a certain hard-headedness of a different kind that it takes to be a writer or an artist of any kind. Probably really a person of any kind. But I feel like I uh, started writing when I knew this was what I was going to be doing when I was in high school, as I'm sure we'll come to. But it took I didn't publish anything for 20 years. I didn't publish a thing until I was 40, not for want of trying. And so it's like you have to be pretty deranged to persevere as a writer or as a filmmaker. I mean, everybody who's in the business on any kind of in any creative capacity knows this, right?
yeah.
I would assume Substack is a really great place for writers and creators, and I know so many people. I encounter so many people in here where I think, wow, this person's really a fantastic writer. uh, you know, like,
And
and the system is not treating them right. Yeah,
yeah, and then I mean that was the case for me. It was I had a story I wanted to tell, but there was no, the the system does what was successful yesterday, and
yeah,
if what you're doing is not necessarily what was working yesterday, then there typically isn't a place for you. So, as a writer, that's been hard to, self-publishing a book is a tough path
yeah,
to go down.
yeah, and but not as tough as it used to be. I mean, it's interesting because I do know people who have done that, and again, people who are writing really really strong stuff, and you on the one hand, there are many cases where I just think, 20 years ago, you would have sold this for, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now
Yeah,
you've got, people sort of going, well, the writing's beautiful, but,
yeah,
and, I mean, you see it with filmmakers too, right? People, I mean, it's like, it's just the path has narrowed so much. And, it's, it takes, uh, you know, some flexibility, I think, that you didn't used to need.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Well, let's get into that path. By the way, we have a lot of guests here with us today. A lot of lunch mates.
Yeah. I see
And
the names, familiar
uh,
names popping up on the
yeah,
screen.
let's say hello to Katie Odie, who
Oh, hey.
went to
Hi.
went to college
Hamster
with
days. Yeah.
absolutely with us both. Um, but if you have questions or comments or thoughts or disparagements or you just want to tell me you hate me, please send that in the comments here, and we will step into. So now we come to 1982. Actually, for you,
Yeah.
we come to the story starting. You were in high school a couple years before that. That was the year we met in David Koloff's playwriting class, which
Yes,
I'm not
indeed.
I'm not I'm not sure why I was in ninth grade, having just arrived at Crossroads. I don't know how, but a fateful choice. That's where we met. Tell me about being a teenager in the 80s in the shadow of this agency that was becoming, something big at that point, and your life there. And I at the time I didn't know what CAA was. I wouldn't have known that
I think
you're
CA was in the midst. I mean, first of all, the school we went to, Crossroads, which is now this kind of Tony, uh, prep school on the west side, right? The Erewhon of Los Angeles private schools. But at the time was really my mom had been the Spanish teacher there in the '70s. She was an administrator. And I think they just enrolled me there because tuition was cheap and because it was cool. It was like sort of a progressive, arts oriented space,
Do
right?
you recall what I recently was going through my parents' old financial papers, and I found an old tuition bill. Do you want to guess what the tuition was in 1982? This
In
is probably going to
'82, I mean, it was. I think couldn't have been more than 5 grand, was it? Probably a little
four
under.
thousand $4,000.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
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 that was a year of Crossroads of $4,000. I'm sorry if anyone has had a heart attack here during that.
yeah,
Please,
yeah. What is it now? Like fifth, probably 60 or something obscene.
I
Um,
think they just say like, "What have you got?" Like,
yeah, they,
just
they just grab you by the ankles and turn you upside down when you walk in.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see you drove in that Maserati. Okay, that's a good start.
Well, in our day, anyway, it was just. I feel like it was just kind of beginning to turn, right? Because they were when I started there 82. There were probably still how many kids in school? 350, something like that. 300 for grades
Yeah, it was
7 to 12.
about 70, 80 people per class. Yeah.
And
So,
some of them were there were the kind of the children of Hollywood were arriving, right?
yeah.
Your classmate and my buddy, who we went to the prom together, was Renee Estevez, right? Martin
Yeah.
Sheen's daughter.
You
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 know,
have you have some amazing stories of
that's a good one. Yeah, don't give that one away. That's a that's a
okay.
that's a really bonkers story
Please
about
get the book
that.
just to read life an incredible incident growing up in the Estevez Sheen house there.
Yeah, but it was also a place where we were saturated with film was taught to us as we had a Jim Hosney, our film studies teacher, and again at the time especially it's like how many high schools even offered that.
I mean,
um,
no, not. I don't think any colleges offered that at the
no,
time. It was
no,
one.
but I feel like that slotted in. It's like it was right before my great book seminar, right? So it's like an hour in the morning talking about Godard and Bertolucci and Visconti, and then on to go to Jeff Cooper's great books class talking about Sophocles and so on. Um, it was cool, and it was definitely a weird counterweight to my after school job of like going to CAA and working in the mailroom with a bunch of cocaine addled young aspirants, and reading scripts on weekends, which I was also
But
doing.
there's something about the whole thing at either ends of the spectrum of like kind of the young artistic kids. It was all kind of sort of ramshackle and informal in a way that like is unimaginable now. It was like it was a very, you know, taking the bus around Hollywood, around LA from when I was probably 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
I would take the bus to downtown, and the whole thing, and it just had you didn't feel like there was this empire that you were walking in the shadow of all the time.
No, because it wasn't one. I mean, it really was not one. That was, I mean, right. They were sort of the little engine that could, in a lot of ways. William Morris and ICM were still kind of the big dogs, I think, and there was some mystique around CAA, and they had these kind of weird codes, like, I mean, just all the kind of agents you couldn't do this if you were a trainee or whatever, but it's like
Yeah,
they all had vanity plates on their cars that were like, CAA, and then whatever their in-office initials were, right? So,
yeah,
you'd go walk through the garage and there'd be like this line of Porsches that would be like CAA, RM, Ron Meyer, MSO, Mike Ovitz, RN, Rick Nacita. Yeah.
yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Look,
So they were like a sports team, or a small time crime syndicate or something. They had a kind of uniform.
and the my favorite thing to tell people the difference of Crossroads back then was the school had we there. You remember there was a smoking
Yes.
patio
Yes.
on campus. There was a smoking area, but I
Yeah.
was told when I came in ninth grade, it was like, "Oh, this is a smoking area, but you have to get a note from your parents if you want to use the smoking
Did you?
area." You
Yeah.
had to, yeah, they had to sign up permission slip saying, you say, "Oh yeah, of course my child can smoke on
Yeah.
campus."
Yes. Yeah.
That's
That it is funny, but it's true. I lived in that little area, intimidated by all those gorgeous goth
the
girls.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, gone on to we've all gone on to amazing things.
Yes.
But the so what what was the essence of the Gen X upbringing? And then with this sense of sort of we were latchkey kids, but we had kind of intellectual uh, pretensions and sort of
Yeah, I think
ambitions beyond.
I think in a lot of ways, and again, it's like, I know that we're a kind of particular subset of Gen X, right?
Yeah,
Uh, I do think that in a lot of ways we were a generation where, I mean, obviously, again, I mean, I keep thinking, I think of my generation as being, very punk rock, very, very anti-Reagan at the time.
mm,
But then you sort of look back at even a place like Crossroads, and you see like a lot of people who grew up to be agents and lawyers, and who were probably more tuned in to the sort of Gordon Gekko Wall Street version of Jen, or the what's his name, Bud
yeah,
Fox,
Bud Fox, yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
But I think for our subset of it, and it continued when you and I went to Hampshire College. It's like
Yeah,
everybody that we knew was, obviously there was a kind of cynicism that was baked into it, but there was, I think, a kind of coded, I don't know if I'd call it idealism, but still kind of a stubborn belief that, like, you were supposed to do something with your life that involved generating meaning.
yeah.
Um, you know,
The idea that you were going to go to you know just law school, like
right, right. You were not necessarily, selling out. There was still a kind of sense that to sell out was a pejorative thing to do.
I
Um,
mean, I talk about this in my memoir of Hampshire College. I don't think when I was in college, I ever had a conversation with anyone about what are you going to do after you graduate.
right,
Like, I don't think there was any awareness of like you're here in college and you're starting on a track and you should be applying for internships and building up. It was like the most you would talk about with you basically had three. You're going to live in New York,
right.
San Francisco, or Seattle,
Yeah,
or
pretty much, and
and that
and yeah, that was the sort of path. But yeah, no, you were not expected to have necessarily figured it out. And I think about this a bit because I chose San Francisco of those three when I graduated, and
Mhm.
I went there. And the reason I went there was because like I knew I wanted to write. I didn't I didn't want to write Less Than Zero, particularly not because I don't like that book. I do, but I just thought like, well, I could do that, but that's not really what I want to write about. So I really did just kind of like move there because it was inexpensive, which again seems kind of insane to say of San Francisco, but it was, and just like a place where I could kind of figure out how to be, how to sustain myself as a writer and as an artist. Um, and it was crazy because when I moved to New York, I mean, I think it was like all of 26, but suddenly I was like, plunked into a world where I was dealing with all these people in publishing, and they were all people who had like, graduated from Yale and then gone to the Radcliffe publishing program or whatever, and I thought like, oh, like these are people who just who've been kind of headed up the ladder since they were, they saw there was a ladder and they just went for it, from the moment they graduated. And I just thought, wild, like, it's a very different kind of
Yeah.
person who does that.
Well, that brings us to so your book kind of takes down a road at the next phase of so the book actually begins with you with a prologue of you in your home being told by a gentleman who's there that you're meant to be an artist, and that man was David Lynch, uh,
Yeah.
and then you spend about half that book sort of not sort of trying to get away. I would say trying to get away from that from that diagnosis or
Well,
running from.
yeah, or grappling with it, I guess. I mean, it's a true story about David Lynch, but I, I think it was more. I had such mixed feelings about the business, because I grew up in it, and and I think at that time it was mostly just complicated family feelings, right? I didn't want
Yeah,
to kind of walk in my dad's footsteps, and the kind of executive half of the business, which I lived in, for my late 20s and early 30s, was a poor fit for me. Like
yeah.
I was kind of strangely successful at it because I kind of took this. I didn't know that I was supposed to be afraid of getting fired, so I would just kind of speak my mind, and even when I would get yelled at for that, as I did on any number of occasions, I didn't really care. I thought, well, what are you going to do? Fire me? And then I'll just go. I'm not planning to do this job forever anyway. Uh,
Mhm.
but I think because of that, it kind of engendered this weird moment of like, almost a kind of mystique where, people would just be like, oh, like, do you want a promotion? Do you need a bigger office? Do you need, another assistant?
That
Um,
is the only thing that people respect in Hollywood. That the willing the sense that like I'm not dying to be here. If you're ever too hungry for anything in Hollywood, you're doomed.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep thinking about my first development job. I was in New York. It was when I was working for Danny DeVito, and one of my bosses called me, not Danny. One of my bosses called me up and said, "Oh, I want you to see this play, Rent. Remember Rent, the musical, right? That had that had opened in the East Village, and the New York Times had given it this big rave." And I said, "Oh, I saw it actually a couple nights ago. Like it's cute. I don't really think it's a movie." And they said, "Well, we want you to see it again." And I said, "Why? I literally just saw it. I can still hum the songs. What do you need to know?" And they were like, "Well, when the New York Times says that blah 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 blah," and I said, "Listen, um, Michael, if you want to know what the New York Times thinks, you can subscribe to the uh, New York Times, and if you want to know what I think, that's why you pay me." And I hung up on. Um, and
Exactly.
I didn't really
You
know that that was like the sort of thing that like was frowned upon. But anyway,
little they know, 30 years later, the movie of Rent would be a total flop.
well,
You were right.
yeah,
Um,
that's all right.
but
I make my mistakes too.
while you're going through that, um, the Hollywood industry and CAA in particular is exploding into becoming this empire, and I
Yeah,
really think the journey of CAA. I can never read enough about CAA and that story because I really think it's a great Shakespearean tale of Hollywood history, and it's so consequential.
Yeah.
in how it changed uh, in how it changed the industry and shaped sort of everything we know now. So tell us about
Yeah. That's an interesting one. And by the way, I'm happy to see it. I love seeing these names crop up. Hi, Danielle Parsons. Hello.
Danielle.
I, the CAA myth, which is kind of such a foundational kind of like 20th century American business myth, right? It's like the couple of guys and they worked out of their garage or, whatever in their case. We didn't have assistants. We had card tables and our wives were answering the phone and, but and I feel like that's on the one hand, there's a whole, and then there's the whole kind of story about, Ovitz, the partnership between Ovitz and Meyer, and Meyer being the Menchie gentleman, which as we were discussing earlier, he really is, I think Ron is, but and Ovitz being the kind of Machiavellian, But I guess I feel like I mean, on the one hand, like it's not like I knew those guys well. I was just underfoot, but I was watching them
Mm.
very, very, very closely. And I was, I found that dynamic really fascinating, particularly the dynamic between Mike and Ronnie, and just and the dynamic which I think still at that time drove the business, which was the dynamic between greed and expansion, those kind of eternal human forces, but also personal disquiet, personal restlessness. Um, I weirdly, I feel
The
like
forces that drive people to accomplish something at this level are the same thing that will ultimately make them unable to be happy with their accomplishments.
yes, 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 and I do find that really human. I mean, it's like there are people in the book who are famously, and who I've encountered who are famous for their tempers or transgressions or failures. Whether it's Michael or Scott Rudin or whatever, and I try. It's so easy, as one sees in most kind of movies or shows or books of novels about Hollywood, to kind of be very caustic about these people, to kind of greet them with the most cynical eye imaginable, and not for no reason, I think, but I also wanted here to kind of take a slightly different tack and see about kind of examining these people through motives that aren't often interrogated with them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and but ultimately, what they were building became so big, it got away from them, it got away
Right.
from the industry, and it became the shape of the whole world that we're living in now.
Yes.
It became
Yes.
the it's kind of the empire killed the republic.
Yeah.
The business became so successful
Yeah.
that it overwhelmed the filmmaking and everything
Yeah.
else. So,
Yeah. And the numbers became, it's like that sense of scale, which I think, this is the kind of fallout from that, not just in the industry, but beyond that, is something that we're all kind of still having to kind of contend with. We live in a world where kind of the idea of wanting to make a piece of art, or kind of wanting to do things on a kind of human scale, can seem negligible or ridiculous, when I don't think it is. I mean,
yeah,
it's what most of us actually want.
yeah, and that is the story of Gen X. Why we have been so at odds with this.
Right.
The kind of our and why we are ultimately the heroes of the story of Hollywood is our generational refusal to be a part of a machine and
Yeah.
be part of something, and to insist for individualism and individuality. Which brings me to I want to actually step back to your last book, which I love. Is one of the the current book, the Golden Hour. Hold it up again for the people who've come here since. Everybody who hasn't, the Golden Hour, his book out next week. Uh, Everyone should buy it. But your last book was is also, I think, like in the pantheon of my favorite books about Hollywood. And it was Always Crashed in the Same Car. It was about people who are sort of on the cusp of greatness or touch greatness, like one foot, but they're it is these sort of haunting stories that intertwine at their own of these people that the something about the artistic impulse that drives them down makes them kind of too fragile people to succeed and survive in the system.
Well, I think most people. I mean, yes, the book is sort of about not just artistic but personal feelings of or collisions with failure or with kind of periods of unproduction or loss or whatever, and trying to reckon with that a little bit. And I do think that almost everybody, it's like we really do like to imagine you know other people's lives, successful lives, as this kind of unbroken upward bound continuum, or just this idea that, like, what comes after success? More success. And I think for most people, that's really not true, right? You have moments where things are going really well, and then stuff tends to fall apart. And if you're lucky, you can kind of rebuild and resurrect. But that's the sort of the that's a more common life story for artists than anything else, right? And for, like I said, for most people. Um, so yeah, it was that book. I mean, I really did write that book feeling like about 14 people were going to read it, and but that they'd probably really love it, and that it was it's been kind of a shock to find that one has had real adhesion among readers, and I still get a ton of mail about that book, which is 4 or 5 years old, and I feel like now that people, uh,
those stories are so haunting. Like, and you just never thought of them together. And it this is something that I've kind of been fascinated by growing up here, uh, sort of on the periphery of all this. The extent to which fame is this kind of light that is so powerful and draws people in so way, and just the proximity to it, um, just it's like it should have a warning label everywhere around, because it makes people lose their marbles. Certainly, people who become famous, but even people who are like one step away from fame,
yeah.
or fame adjacent or anything, and just like people just lose it. There's something about this force and this recognition that makes people just go bonkers. And
Yeah, it's not a comfortable or healthy feeling, even to be real close to it. And I feel like I kind of observed a lot, from childhood, was able to kind of observe a lot of it. I think attention makes a mess of people. There's that thing they say about billionaires, or when where the accumulation of a lot of capital can cause cognitive actual cognitive damage, right?
mm,
Uh, which that is apparently a scientific fact, um, which explains a lot, actually. but,
is
but
there is has science determined, like, is there a right level of fame, or like just being like a who's the actor that was talking about how he's had a great career because he's been sort of known and always works, but is not recognized anywhere when he goes out. So it's just like once a month, someone says hi.
that
It
seems
was
about that. That seems about right. I mean, I think there. I do think. I mean, I don't think it's scientifically calculable, but I do think there's a kind of optimal degree of sort of recognition and reward for, again, for anybody in what they do. And everybody needs a fair amount of that, right? It's not it's very unhelpful to lead a life where you don't receive any, for your work. But I think an excess of it is not good. I've never seen that be helpful to anybody, and I've seen it for a lot of people in a lot of
yeah.
fields.
Dostoevsky thought that the upper middle class was where art was the right place for artists to come from, because you have enough success that you're not worried about starving. You're not, but it says too much success sort of divorces you from the natural rhythms of mankind. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, leaving aside that Dostoevsky was talking about a very different set of class stratifications than we
yeah,
currently have, and I feel like the American arts world and world in general is tilted unreasonably towards the wealthy, um, and also what is upper middle class anymore? I don't think that
well, that's
any kind of middle class really exists, and that's our problem, isn't it?
that is the truth there. It's and we are. I want to. If people have any questions here, we're coming into our final 5 minutes here. So get in your questions right now about CAA, about Hollywood, and everything. Um, the so I wanted to read. You wrote today. I wanted to read an extended quote of yours from your review of the studio, which was in GQ today. The last paragraph. If I am I spoiling your review if I
No,
read
no, go right,
the
go
end of it?
ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. And you talk a lot about the depictions of studio executives and everything, and then and writers, and then at the end, you say, see, sometimes it's not the studio executives who are hacks. Sometimes it's the writers. Left to our own devices without bean counters to rein us in, we'll keep smuggling our personal obsessions like our dogs into the work. Keep tacking our excessive quotas into our own alphabet cities. My editor will tell me to cut this graph probably, and I'll fight him to keep it because if I had any sense at all, I would have kept my job as an executive. I might have struggled to keep a straight face as I watched a room full of people with plush 6 and 7 figure salaries change their mind on a dime about one of the worst scripts ever written, Patch Adams, after someone mentioned Robin Williams sort of liked it. Well, now that you mentioned it, this is kind of the kind of material Robin can elevate. But at least in those days, I had health insurance. Now I'm a schmuck with a MacBook and not even enough of a dummy to whiff on the studio's appeal. Then again, that's the essence of being a successful studio executive anyway. Just smart enough to champion a thing everybody else apparently and justly in this instance loves. That's the real magic of Hollywood, baby. I thought that really summed up nicely the whole kind of balance between to bring it all around the arts and commerce between the artist and the executive who both when Hollywood is functioning at its best need each other and work together as much as both sides hate that fact.
yes,
Uh,
yeah.
and talk to me about I've gone on so tell me your feelings about that.
Obviously, I'm clowning around a bit in that paragraph, but I am and kind of alluding to various things I've said earlier in the essay. But I do think you know the decision to kind of become a working artist instead of going on down the road of wanting to become a studio head myself. I'm sure I would have washed out before
Mm.
that, but that seemed a reasonable decision to make in the mid '90s. It still seemed like, oh, I could walk away from this and go be successful as a writer, which I'm better at anyway, and which is something that I love. Um, I don't really think that was a dumb decision in any sense, but the practical. Right?
Just that.
Yeah, I mean, in purely practical terms, a nightmare. Dumbest thing I ever did. In terms of kind of personal fulfillment and waking up and being able to live with myself every day, the opposite of that. Very, very satisfying. But I also think those things are they exist in a kind of at best in a kind of productive tension, right? I do believe that like it is useful for that artists need that the writers need editors, and that the most gifted filmmaker in the world can benefit from having someone willing to question whether they really need to do it the way they're trying to do it. Having seen Megalopolis, I feel like Francis could have used that, for example. Yeah.
Exactly. So our final question. The hour has flown by.
Yeah.
I didn't begin. I said to you at the beginning there are a lot of paths this conversation could have gone on.
Yeah.
I feel like we've touched some of them and left a lot on the table for another conversation there to come. So hope you rejoice. But
Absolutely.
our
Yeah.
final question to ask everybody. So I ask everybody, um, what would you say to a young Matthew Specktor uh, coming into the industry or coming or going down your path? But I think from myself, like you, I think the path. I don't have I didn't have a career path that anyone could replicate in any normal way. But what if you could see yourself getting out of Hampshire College right now,
Yeah.
studying graduating with a poetry degree and with honors, uh, going into the world, what would you tell yourself? What would be your advice
um,
to young you on?
it's funny. I feel like trying to retrofit the wisdom, questionable as it may be, of my current age into my younger self, very difficult. I mean, I would say do what you're trying to do now. Like, you're in a burning building. Like, don't try not to wait. Try not to spend 5 years like just figuring out how to write a sentence. Like, do it now. Um, but of course, that's just contrary to everything we know about life and time, which is that you can only do things when you're actually internally prepared to do them. Um,
The
so I feel like that's useless wisdom, unfortunately. Um,
No, that is very good wisdom. That's all we can do. Whatever
yeah.
moment is handed to us, hope to seize it as best we can. And I hopefully we seize the moment of this lunch here today.
Yeah, we've
It's
done our
like
we've done our best. I did want to say too, my friend
yes,
Jason
please.
Rice. I saw my friend Jason Rice ask, "Are you going to write another novel?"
Yeah,
Very, very definitely.
excellent.
What I write next will be an actual work of fiction. It won't just read like one, and yeah, I mean, which this hopefully does in some ways, but not in others. It is an honest recounting of events as best I could
Yeah,
manage.
yeah.
But yeah, it will be that, and it will not be. It will probably not be Hollywood themed at all.
Oh
Um,
wow, Jason, that you gave the right answer apparently.
yeah, yeah.
The
So
And once again, the Golden Hour by Matthew Specktor, our guest today, out next week. Pre-order it on where would you like people to do their pre-ordering?
you can do it on Bookshop. You can do it on Amazon. Amazon. I won't judge anybody for that. We all
Okay.
still use it, even though we try sometimes not to.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful. I will be seeing you shortly.
yeah,
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everyone who's here. Next week, the guest will be Lena Dunham. Uh, we hope so. So come back and join us for the Rushfield lunch. It's uh, been great having you all. Take care.
awesome, wonderful to be here. See you later.
Bye bye.
Bye.